Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Infoversity, the iSchoolers podcast here at Syracuse University. Today, I'm with Renate Chancellor, an associate professor and associate dean for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, at Syracuse University School of Information Studies. With a PhD from UCLA's Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, she has been a thought leader in DEIA for more than 2 decades. Her work includes publications on critical cultural information studies and social justice in informational contexts. Renate also serves on the editorial board and has consulted with organizations such as the Library of Congress and the State Department. We're thrilled to have her today to discuss various topics, including her new book, Breaking Glass Ceilings. Welcome, Renate.
Thank you, Mike. That was a lovely introduction.
So how has your semester started out? Let's talk a little bit about DEIA. Have you had anything going on in the DEI space at the beginning of the semester?
Absolutely. Can't talk about it, but it has been a few things over the summer and something I'm wrapping up this week that's been DEIA related, so I can't really get into it.
I was thinking more of like what was coming out of the provost's office regarding it. But I get it can be a very challenging position to be in, no doubt. And my hat's off to you for agreeing to accept the position here at the iSchool. It's a very important position, and you're very qualified to have that position.
Thank you.
Let's talk about your book a little bit. So in your book about Clara Stanton Jones, it focuses on her important work in social justice and race in the library profession. How did you decide to write a book about her?
Well, actually, this is my second book on a person of color in the library profession. And so the reason, I guess the impetus for writing about these biographies, or what I call hidden figures, is because these people had a large contribution to the library profession, but the work hadn't really been documented. In our field, you hear a lot about, the founder of the profession. You hear about this person who did this classification system and all that, but you don't hear about these people who have made, just ginormous contributions. And I wanted to kind of document their stories.
That's true, because I went to the Wikipedia pages of all the former presidents of the ALA, and they sort of mark off like what their significances are. And there's a broad, diverse set of contributions that people have made, whether it's in societal changes to libraries or also like things like the Dewey Decimal System, for example. So really, there's a spectrum there. It's very very interesting. So your other book, who was that about?
So my earlier book is about Josey. He's pioneer in the profession as well. He is really attributed with diversifying the profession in terms of bringing the ALA together in terms of race. Mm-hmm. So prior to his resolution that he delivered to ALA in 1964, which really coincided with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, mm-hmm. The profession was kind of divided. It was during the time of Jim Crow that was in the United States. And so the American Library Association, just like any other American public institution, was split along the lines of race. Mm-hmm. So he authored this resolution, took it to the ALA board, and said, you need to be held accountable to the principles that the ALA espouse in terms of like fairness and equity and democracy. So at the time, the profession always was open to everyone and very democratic. Mm-hmm. But you had these southern states like Alabama and Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi that wouldn't allow Black membership into their state associations. And so he didn't like that. He actually was working in Savannah in Georgia at the time. Mm-hmm. So he authored this proposal, went to ALA, and actually through a lot of wrangling, it got supported. And so he's kind of attributed with that. And he did a lot of other great things as well.
That's foundational.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. You said that Black women are the backbone of libraries and their work often goes unnoticed. What can you do to make sure that does not continue? And what does that mean exactly? Explain
Well,
that a bit.
yeah, I'm not even sure if that was my exact quote, but I do think that just Black and brown people in the profession are unnoticed. They don't get, like I said, their contributions aren't really well discussed in LIS curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
They're not written about. And so I do think, particularly for Black women, um, they are a minority in the library profession. I think the latest statistics that I can cite to maybe 2023, the profession is predominantly white. I think it's like 82%. And so in terms of Blacks, African Americans that are in the profession is very small. I think like 11%, if I'm not mistaken. And so they don't have breakdowns as to if they're women or men. It's just like the African Americans that are comprised of the profession. But a lot of the contributions, like I said, have gone unnoticed. There's other people like Clara, Stanton who have done other things, great things in the profession, but they just don't get noticed. So one of the things that I like to do in the classroom is bring forth these stories.
Yeah.
So that students can hear about, so they can get a well-balanced idea or impression of who is making these contributions to the profession.
Can we talk a little bit about, you brought up a number, and that there's not many African American students in library science? Or
That's true too.
Not many African American library scientists?
Absolutely.
Both, right?
Yeah.
So that talks to representation, right? Because libraries are everywhere, and you go to a library and it might be in an ethnically diverse neighborhood, and you want people in that library to somewhat represent the people that go to that library, right?
Yes.
So that's why it's important that we try to diversify librarianship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely.
Just trying to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying.
No, absolutely. That's correct.
That's really important, I think. Let's talk about the glass ceiling. So you talk about the glass ceiling, especially for Black women in the library world. Have we seen any progress with respect to that glass ceiling?
So it's interesting, just to kind of give you just a little bit of, or the viewers, a little bit of history. So the profession was founded predominantly by white men in the 19th century, 1876. And at that time, it was predominantly a male profession.
Yeah.
Right? And so that changed once we hit the 20th century. And so women started being involved. And until today, it is predominantly a female perspective of women who are comprised of the profession. However, there are not that many women in leadership within the profession. That includes women librarians, like library directors, branch managers, and it also include women directors of LIS programs or iSchools. So there's still that huge disparity that exists between men and women. And then if we kind of drill down even more in terms of the race, even smaller.
I see. And what do you think we can do about that?
Well, I think this book actually is one part to doing that. It contributes to that. But also, I think that it has to come from the leadership. In terms of the schools and universities, they have to want to understand that that representation that you mentioned earlier is essential, is important. And so they need to make a conscious effort to not only just recruit people of color, but also put mechanisms in place to retain them.
And that seems like a responsibility of a school like ours. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like, to find a way to sort of build in a balance, if you will.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And also just for schools to have someone looking into this, like creating DEIA officers and deans to help, students who come into the school who are representative of they are from an underrepresented population, to make them feel comfortable and at home. And the same thing with faculty.
Mm-hmm. Why isn't there much documented about African American women's contributions in libraries?
That's a great question. That might be the question of the century, right?
It seems like a softball compared to all the other ones.
Absolutely.
Let's hear it.
It's a loaded question. I think maybe the effort hasn't really been put forth to do that. Um, I think there's a lot in the field. I think people have different varying interests, and so not everyone is concerned about doing that,
Mhm.
right? Not everyone is concerned about making it a priority. And so, that's why I am writing this book. That's why I do research in this area. That's why I do give talks on this particular topic. That's why I try to find opportunities to tell stories about it. And that's what I did, I think, with Clara Stanton Jones's story.
That's awesome. How would you like to see us, you know, improve? Like I talked about, there isn't much documented out there, right? But what ways can we improve that?
So that's a great question. I think one way to improve like the documentation is for scholars to write about it, scholars to also to bring it into the classroom so students are interested.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do in the IST 511 course that I teach here is that that's the very first foundations course in the program. So when I taught it last year, I created this luminary assignment. So students will choose a person who's a luminary, and they have to do like a analysis and like a written analysis, and they have to do a presentation. And so there are people of color who they may not have otherwise heard about,
Mhm.
and rather than hear me talk about all the people of color in the profession, I have them actually do the research and present it. And I think what has come out of that is that students they are familiar with more people of color and their contributions to the profession. And some of them have been really interested in doing projects outside of that. So I think that's one thing because you're starting with, I would call like junior scholars, master's students, right, who are interested in the topic. So that's one way I think we could do it. And like I said, the continued researching different aspects of their contributions would also be another way to do that.
Good, good. Let me ask you a question about your research. What are you doing right now in your research?
So I have a couple of projects going on right now.
Mhm.
So I received a mini grant looking at investigating social work in public libraries. And so I'm working with a doctoral student, Shannon Crooks, and this summer we're going to be visiting three metropolitan public libraries to see what they're doing in terms of outreach to help their users with social services. And so this summer we went to San Francisco Public Library, we're going to go to DC Public Library, and we're going to go to Brooklyn Public Library to kind of see, because these are big metro cities that have a huge problem with homelessness, because that is a huge issue in the field.
Mhm.
And so we want to have a better understanding as to what they're doing. And we're looking at this phenomenon of like social work librarian, like social worker, people who have a master's in social work or who do not, but they're working in libraries to help with those issues that patrons or users may come in. But so that's what we're doing. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on. The other project that I'm working on is very preliminary, but I'm looking at this issue of understanding the information role of passengers through the Underground Railroad, looking at them from the perspective of like social networks and what they may have, what was some of the informational um, aspects, how did they engage with information in order to make those passages through the Underground Railroad during the 18th and 19th centuries.
That's a fascinating research subject as well. I think I want to go back to something you said about libraries, and you and I both know this, but maybe our audience doesn't, right? That today's library is much different than the conventional library, right? And it's even different. The community libraries are much different than a school library, right? So can we talk about, like, I know, because I spend my entire summer at my community library. So I'm very well aware of what I see going on in that library. There are a lot of services that go well beyond just renting a book or renting a tool. There's training that goes on. There's employment services. There's resume writing services. There's a tremendous amount of community outreach at my library. So can we talk a little bit about that? Do you want to have a comment on that? Or talk about maybe, you mentioned social work in libraries. That to me seems like a very logical connection, but do you want to like elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think you see the evolution of the library over time. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Google was first created, right? Which was like my first year in library school. And they were like, oh, the physical library is going to go away, right? Because the perception of the public was that librarians actually just were in the library, they sat behind a desk, right? And they may have been reading or they can point you to a book, right? That has, I mean, that was the case maybe in the 19th century. That has evolved over time. And so even today we see there are like you said, there's so many programs like How to Garden. There are concerts that are held in libraries.
Yep.
There's just so many things in public libraries, in public institutions. There are so many things to outreach to the community because public libraries specifically is about outreach, community outreach. How can we help the community? And I think social work falls in that vein, right?
Yeah.
So people come in from the community that are dealing with issues of, trauma. They're dealing with issues of, like latchkey children are coming to the library, to use an antiquated term. And so, yeah, people are coming to the library. So the library they are community anchors. And so people do come to the library. And so libraries are constantly looking at how they can improve their services to best help the needs of their users. And so I think social work is one aspect of that.
Yeah, and this goes right back to what we were saying earlier about if you're going to be a community library, you want the people that work in the library to be representative of the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's important.
Yeah, and then just to kind of add on that, I've also have done research in the past about how libraries are community anchors in terms of crises, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, when we had the Ferguson incident many years ago, 2015, I believe, that was with Freddie Gray, if I'm not mistaken. So everything, all the public institutions in the community of Ferguson shut down, except for the library.
Yeah.
The same thing happened years later in Baltimore when they had an uprising as well. All the public institutions pretty much closed down except for the library because these branch librarians felt that where else can kids come in who were displaced from their schools? Where else can people come in and find information for help? And so in these instances, these libraries stayed open during crisis. Yeah.
That's great. I love it. What do you think is the greatest threat to libraries and librarians these days, and why?
Oh my gosh. So without getting too political,
Oh, it's all right.
because there's a lot of politics. I mean, I think one of the hot button topics now is the whole censorship, right?
Yeah, the banned books.
Yeah, the banned books of materials, reading,
Yeah.
that is huge. However, I want everyone to know that that is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for many, 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 many decades. And so I think that is a huge threat because it has so much momentum that it just started in a particular region of the United States, and it's just really kind of like blossomed, And so I think that's a huge threat. And this whole idea of misinformation and disinformation is also a huge threat. And libraries have always been about, people thought with this 2016 election that this whole idea of fake news and misinformation was really a new issue. It really hasn't been a new issue for librarians, the profession, because librarians have always been about information literacy.
You got it.
Critically evaluating sources, and that's at the core of misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah, that always makes me sort of angry when I'm watching the news and there's like a segment on a banned book and people are blaming librarians. And I'm like, you don't understand librarians if you're blaming librarians for this, because librarians are trained to not introduce their biases, into whatever it is they're doing. It's all about access to information, helping you find information, keeping information free and available to people, right? So that they can decide what they want to do with that information. So whenever I see something like that, and it's usually when I'm at my dad's house, I'll see it, not at mine. I always have to remind my father that I work at a school that is founded in library science, and then I have to tell him about the ethos of library science, and that it's the same kind of thing. I always like try to equate it with a doctor, right? Doctors are not supposed to do any harm, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't mean there aren't a few bad actors out there. I go, but most librarians live under the mantra that we're not going to censor information. It's not about censoring information. It's about providing access so that you can make informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Keeping information free is important. And that's what the internet is so I think critical to what libraries do, what their library missions are. Like my library loans out Wi-Fi, like mobile Wi-Fi for families that don't have really good internet access. And I think it's important because that's a really solid way for people to get access to the information that they need in today's day and age. But it is a concern, the misinformation, disinformation. And I feel that's another really challenging mission that you and I have in library schools is helping people to become very information literate and AI literate nowadays in today's day and age. And I think that's one of the things that we, it's on our shoulders to produce students that are AI and information literate. They can think critically about what they see. It's more important than ever because with the prevalence of social media, it's so easy for people to gain access to any information, and we don't know if that information is valid, right?
Absolutely.
And so making sure that you're a critical thinker and someone who vets the source of where you get the information is like imperative. I didn't mean to go on a rant there. But.
No, absolutely, and that's what I'm teaching in my class this semester. We're looking at this AI and especially generative AI, where they're getting these resources. Are they getting it from like Wikipedia and sources that are already biased? So what does that mean, right? So even though we don't know a lot about AI at this point because it's still evolving, it's absolutely information literacy issue.
Yeah, there really used to be an old game I would play in the early days of Google where I would put a article that was wrong on a site, and then Google would find it. And then it was like some ridiculous thing that made no sense and it was all made up. Yeah. And then I would have my freshman forum class research that topic and it would always come up on the first page. And so people would cite that and you just cited me, and it was like fake. And we do that as the thing. And it's hard to do that now because Google sort of caught on.
Yes.
And it's sort of difficult to do that on social media or anything like that. But it was a really powerful exercise in trusting the information that you find. And just because you can find it quickly and easily doesn't mean it's accurate.
Absolutely.
Right? Yes. Yeah. So I know we got off topic there, but it's worth talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely worth talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback. So our librarians, people who leave our program, in the LIS program, they don't just go work in public libraries. I mean, they do, or they work in academic libraries, they do, but they also work in corporate libraries, right? They work with corporations, Hewlett Packard, or other, the MITRE Corporation and other corporations, and they do information architecture. They're, the whole idea of information. So that is, I just don't want people to think that people in our program just really want to go work in a typical traditional library. They actually can work anywhere.
A lot of our students have been getting, recently some of our students have been getting a job in government.
Yes.
And not working for like the Library of Congress, but working in government, doing what librarians do.
Yep.
But in government agencies like the FDA, because they have the traditional information management challenges that a large corporation would have.
Yeah. Right. My previous institution, I worked in DC. Our students went to go work at the State Department, FDA, all these, organizations because the key is really information and organization and management of it.
I'm happy when I see a company hire our LIS students. I'm like, they get it. They get the value of having someone like that in their organization or having a team of people like that within the organization.
Yep.
Because managing information is challenging and difficult. And one thing that I've noticed is true, and I've been doing this kind of stuff for a very long time as you, is that it doesn't get easier. It only gets harder because there's different channels of information now, and the streams are much more rapid. and the relevance cycle is shorter. So all of these things play into a challenge where it's while you can use some technology to help you, people are always going to need to be there.
Right.
Just because unless the volume of information that has stems and dies down at some point, we're going to be more, a human in the human loop is going to be even more important than ever.
Right.
As we go forward.
Right. And I think kind of taking it back to Clara Stanton Jones, one of her signature pieces when she became executive director of the Detroit Public Library, before she became director, I believe she started a program called TIP, that it was called the Information Place. And what she did was, because she had previously been assigned to work in the community to help individuals in the community, help connect people in the community with information, and also drive them to the library. She came up with this idea of TIP. And I like to say that was like a pre-internet way of accessing information. And so she created that for Detroit, and it just eventually spread out to other libraries, and it still exists today. So it was her brainchild, which kind of formulated this whole idea of connecting people to information.
That's awesome. Let me try to go back on script here a little bit. So your book shares how Clara Stanton Jones stirred the waters in the Detroit Library, as you just mentioned, right? Who's stirring the water in the libraries of the world today?
That's a great question, because when I look back, I mean, as you know, I consider myself a historian. When I look back over the history of the profession, people like Josey and Clara Stanton Jones and Sandy Berman, there's all these notable people who really made a lot of stirs, like they ruffled feathers, right? I mean, we do have that, but we don't have it on such a grand scale, or not to the level that they were able to do it. I do think there are scholars who are writing about critical issues in the profession. That is important. But in terms of the librarians who are, there are a few people that I feel that are stirring the waters, but not to the degree that Clara did, or some of the others. Some of the early
some feather ruffling is like important to advancing a field, right?
Absolutely.
You need some disruption that happens, and it's funny because in the tech industry, it's like that's what like it's all about, right? But it's like sometimes in other industries, people are like, "Oh, that's frowned upon." It's like no. Disruption is how we advance and move forward and innovate and think differently about the things that we do. It's so important.
Absolutely.
Because nothing is ever, no process is really ever done because the things that impact that process change over time, right?
Yes.
And the library is a great example of that, because what we used to do in the library in the 19th century and in the 20th century and the 21st century has evolved, and it will continue to evolve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I think the perception of who librarians are is not really what the public think, because typically you may turn on TV, there may be, it varies. When I see a Jeopardy question, but a librarian that wears glasses with a bun on their head reading, right? I think for the most part, a vast part of society believes that's who librarians are. I like to challenge them, because come to some of these association meetings, librarians are rebel rousers, innately, right?
Absolutely.
They rebel rousers. They're going to put themselves out there. They're very, very opinionated. And this is something that I try to have my students really think about. It's fine to have an opinion. It's fine to take a stance, right? It's fine to advocate for a cause, because the profession is really built on that.
And they can back it with sources.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's a real challenge. So you're teaching the next generation of librarians to appreciate people like Clara Stanton Jones, who you write about in your book, right? And so how can those students carry the torch and move it forward, keep the reform going?
That's a great idea. I think it's a good model. I think one of the things when I teach some of the foundation courses, I ask students, I said, why are you here? Why are you becoming a librarian? Because if you think it's about going in and sitting behind a desk, or going and working tech services, doing cataloging, yeah, that's part of it, but that's not all of it, right? A lot of it is about having a voice, making sure that people have equal access to information or equity of information, making sure that people understand how the internet works and how to vet sources, um, making sure that issues of social justice that the profession has adopted, that's in place, making sure in terms of intellectual property, where you're going to create a balance of rights of the creator versus the rights of the user.
Yeah.
Those are advocacy issues that underpin the profession, and I always go back to that in terms of having students, take a stance and just be, willing to put themselves out there on those points. So they may not all do that, but I think a great majority of my students over the years have done that.
Yeah, I think that's really, you really sort of, that resonates with me, because even if you're that librarian that just wants to do like cataloging, right, you still have to know how to defend the library.
Mhm.
You still have to know that, and you can't always be inward facing. You have to be somewhat outward facing and be an advocate. Right? And I think that's one of the essences of library science today is learning to be an advocate. And I think we do that well here. I do.
Absolutely.
I do. Yeah. So what are your hopes and dreams for your students and how they can leave their mark on the library field?
Well, the world is their oyster, really. They can go out there and, like I said, there are luminaries, there are models that they can actually utilize to advocate, go out there and do something for the field. And it doesn't have to rise to the case of Clara Stanton Jones. It could be something small, a Monica, it could be something in their community. It could be creating something to help the community. So a lot of these ideas that I think a lot of these, like I usually have a lot of projects in class to help them think about what it would be like once they're in the field.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a test drive, so to speak. And so those are also models that they can use as well.
And I think that's really, really important. I mean, one of the things that you're doing as a college student, as a grad student, is finding a safe place to learn, right, and fail. And your perspective and lens on history is important, because the best way to go forward is to learn what we did in the past, both to not make the same mistakes we made, but to also say that worked, and why did that work, and how did that work, and how can I take what worked then and apply it to the society and the variables that we have in our society today. And that's a really great lens to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Clara Stanton Jones, one thing I think I would love for students to take away is when she was the first African American and the first woman to oversee, be director of a major public library system. And when her name was circulated to be the director in Detroit, the Detroit Public Library, she faced a lot of backlash. They didn't want her to do it. People quit. They didn't pay her equitably. They didn't say, they had money earmarked for the next director. They said, oh, we're not going to give it to her. People quit, and people were circulating petitions. But she stayed focused, and I think she was very resilient. And she, and once she was elected, once she was, appointed to that position, she proved them all wrong through the actions that she made, right? Yeah. She was able to just, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And she did great. She received a lot of achievement. She went on to become ALA president. She was the first president of Black African American to be president of the American Library Association as well. So she's the first of a lot of a lot. And so I just think that like her whole model and how she maneuvered those challenges and that discord and that racism, I think is a great model for others to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. How can people find your book?
Oh, okay. Well, here's a copy of my book. So here's a copy of my book. One is published by Roman and Littlefield, so they can go order it from the website. It's also on Amazon.com. You can just search Breaking Glass Ceilings, Clara Stanton Jones, and the Detroit Public Library. And if you still can't find it, which I'm pretty sure you can there, you can always reach out to me.
That's great. Yeah. This was a real pleasure. I had a fun time talking with you today. I hope you did the same. And let's put a wrap on this. This is another Infoversity.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.